Mayor Wu, good to see you. Welcome.
Thank you for
Yeah,
having me.
thank you so much for coming in again, Mayor Wu. So let's start, since it's so hot outside, everybody's steaming. What's the city doing summer-wise for programming for kids, for grown-ups? What's going on?
Yeah, we're so excited about the opportunities there are all across the city to be out and about, have fun, stay cool, and stay safe as well. So I brought a little tidbit from our Swim Safe program. These are official City of Boston beach towels
Blue
from
and white.
Swim Safe.
Very nice.
We have partnered with community organizations now to provide more than 8,000 free swim lessons for young people and their families. We made it a multi-generational program because the number one common factor of why a young person might not have learned to swim already is often because their parents never had swim lessons themselves. And so we want to make it available and accessible to everyone. Just this morning, we reopened the Condon pool in South Boston. So I was in the pool. Mira went in for her very first time ever.
Oh my gosh.
she did okay. It wasn't full out crying, but it was a little cold, I think, for her. And I'm just really proud of the work because this has been a real challenge for the city, multiple decades of deferred maintenance. And when we came into office, more than half of the pools needed some kind of repair and had needed it for a significant time. And we kind of had this, it made sense that you respond when there's an immediate emergency and things are so bad that you have to shut down the pool, the water color looks funny or something's happening. But ongoing regular maintenance had really not been prioritized. And so there are 22 official city pools, 21 pools plus the beach attached to the Curly Community Center in South Boston. Of those 21, by the end of this year, our administration will have completely redone, fixed up, or rebuilt from scratch 12 out of the 21. So the scale of what needs to be done has been quite immense. We've done things like have a first ever dedicated pool maintenance contract, so we don't have to wait until things get all the way down to being completely broken down, and we can have that capacity to move quickly and have regular repairs. We've staffed up and overhauled our lifeguards program so that there are no pools for the last several years that had to be closed for lack of staffing, which was not the case prior to that. So there's been a ton of investment, a ton of work, and in addition to all of those pools, again, 22 different sites across the city. There are also 4 state pools, plus 80 parks and playgrounds that have different splash features or fountains, 12 of which I'm proud our administration built or majorly overhauled.
4 of the city pools, though, are closed for the summer. Am I right about that number?
Yep, so by the end, there are 4 more that are, 2 more that are going to open sometime in the next few weeks this summer. And then there's another, I think it might be 3, another 2 or 3 that will be open later in this fall because of the timelines of how the repairs had to happen. Many of these pools are owned by Boston Public Schools because they're in community center/school complexes where the work can't happen during the school year. So unfortunately, it's a kind of rotation schedule where we have to figure out when to take certain pools offline and bring them back online.
And you can sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes you can swim in South Boston. You can swim in the ocean in South Boston as long as there's not some overflow coming from the treatment plant, right? So people can just look online. I mean, how do people know?
Yeah, the Curly Community Center is brand new as of just about a year and a half, 2 years ago, that includes a section of beach right on the ocean, Pleasure Bay. And you can find all these locations, all the pools, all the splash pads, all the parks and playgrounds at boston.gov/heat, because we know this is not just an issue of fun and a nice to have, but really a necessity for this city as the weather's getting warmer and we need it to make sure that everyone can stay safe over the summer as well.
Our number is 877-301-8970. We'll get to all of you in a couple of seconds. You know, in the past few months, we've spoken to you and the governor here about possible sometimes likely cuts coming from the federal government. Now, a couple of rounds are real. The $108 million school cuts throughout Massachusetts, the budget reconciliation bill signed into law on July 4th. What do you know about the actual impact of both of those measures on the city?
Yeah, so the bucket overall is about $300 million of annual federal funding. Our call it exposure or direct kind of threats that we've received of different pools being rescinded has been on a much smaller scale. It's something in the range of $40 to $50 million. We won a lawsuit, one of the lawsuits that we are in the middle of with the federal administration, where they had tried to take back funds by saying funds dedicated annually to address homelessness and housing issues, our Continuum of Care grant, now suddenly would have to comply with every single executive order that banned services for LGBTQ residents or what they would consider quote unquote DEI efforts. And so we fought and won, and so now have access to those funds under the terms prior to the trying to cut certain populations out. So those were preserved. This recent $108 or so million from the state passing through, the city has a small portion of that, but every dollar matters. And this is why we passed a budget several weeks ago at the city level that really was anticipating the need for tightening our belt as much as possible, no new positions, really eliminating the equivalent of about 500 full-time positions through vacancies that we were taking off the city rolls and other salary savings so that we would have the flex room to be able to absorb some of the hits that we knew we might have to take.
One last federal thing before we get to the Coles. Have you any Homan or contact or any the deportations is what I'd call them, or any of the ICE nightmares that we've been reading about?
So we filed our FOIA request. I had made very clear the city of Boston was going to use every bit of our leverage and authority to document and find out what was happening. We have heard many now documented stories about the conditions that people are detained in, the tactics that were used that seem to cross the line into behavior that may or may not be constitutional or in violation of other federal or state laws. So ICE had said that they would welcome the opportunity to comply with an executive order and information request. We have not received that back yet. They first said we need to be more specific about what we were asking for, so we're continuing to press for that and hope to make sure that they follow through on what they said they would do.
We're talking to Mayor Wu, Mayor of the City of Boston, obviously.
Our number is 877-301-8970 if you'd like to call us and text. We have a call from Joe in Chelmsford. Hi, Joe.
Hello, Joe.
Hi, how you doing?
Good.
Hi, Mayor Wu.
Hello.
Hi. Listen, I'm just curious. I can't seem to get any information on this. This affects the whole state, but Boston probably more than anywhere else. What's the story with these public defenders being on strike? Shouldn't the money have been allocated in the recent budget by the legislature to pay them? I'm just trying to make sense of that.
Could you explain what the bar advocate thing is that's going on, if you don't mind, Mayor, for those who don't know?
Yeah, so thank you, Joe, for raising this issue. And you're right, it does impact this city and cities beyond Boston as well. But there have been negotiations to try to come to the appropriate wages and working conditions in the employment contracts for the public defenders who are assigned to make sure that in following the Constitution and the tenets of due process that are laid out, that everyone has representation before the courts. They have not reached an agreement, and there's a provision that has now been deemed to kick into place where without that guaranteed representation, the result is that defendants are being released now. And so that has started to happen. This has been sort of ongoing for some period of time now, and it has reached a point where the courts have decided that this provision has to kick in. We very much hope, we need this to be resolved quickly and as quickly as possible. Of course, this is a country of laws, and this is a commonwealth and a state where we want to ensure that due process is upheld. At the same time, we are hearing of the kinds of cases that are going unresolved, and some of them are certainly quite concerning, of course, for the victims and those who are tied to the individual cases, but for the larger impacts, when our officers go and make an arrest, that is part of a larger set of steps where that case is then brought before a judge or sometimes a jury, and questions of fact are decided, and then consequences are given for harm that has been perpetrated in the communities. And when the process is now being short-circuited because it's not going anywhere after that, it ends up having a big impact at every step and in every community.
And people should just know that what they're requesting, which they haven't gotten from the legislature, is essentially comparable reimbursement fees to what people in surrounding states are getting, which is still below what private attorneys are getting in actual charging of clients who are not indigent criminal defendants.
You know, Mary, we just got a text from someone who says, I'm a supporter, Rosendale resident, attended 4th of July party in the South End, went by mass cast, painful to watch. My driver told me it's the worst he's seen. It was an Uber driver, I guess. And the got to the party made up of South End neighbors. Mass and cast and its effects on the South End remain topic of conversation. People are saying that it's the worst they've seen it. Boston 25 just did a story about this, as I'm sure you know, about people talking about drug deals outside their windows. We talked a lot about mass and cast at the beginning of your administration, but obviously there's a sense that things are not getting better there. What can be done?
Yeah, I want to just be very clear that the stories that I've heard, and I've been out in the neighborhood and in meetings with many of the residents who have been living in the South End for years, and what they are reporting, and what particularly those families with children are reporting having to explain to their kids or worry about with their kids, it's unacceptable, and we are doing everything that we can to continue to get at this challenge. It's complex and hard dealing with a national opiate crisis at the local level as one city. We have made some really significant, real progress on this front. And so unlike, compare now to 4 years ago, before our administration had started, we now have a real infrastructure in place to provide an actual pathway to get people off the streets into treatment and housing and job counseling. And we have seen hundreds of people move off of the streets and are now in supportive permanent housing. And partners like the Pine Street Inn are building and creating even more of that kind of housing that has helped change lives. We just had cut the ribbon a couple weeks ago on the Lindia, a development in Jamaica Plain.
Named
that the
after
Pine Street
Lindia
Inn-
Downey,
Yeah.
I should say.
that the
Well
Pine Street Inn
deserved.
runs. And so all of those processes are now in place. They've been working really well. We have found a way to expand to 24-hour outreach and supports rather than just 9 to 5 during the week. We now have citywide access to our coordinated response team, which brings together public safety, public health, and street outreach and all of our community partners. And if you look at the data, if you look just by the statistics and the numbers, in fact, the number of people who are gathering outside is much lower than last summer or the summers before. The number of people who are living permanently on the streets is far, far lower. But we still have a challenge of outdoor congregate substance use. And as we have tackled the larger problem, we have seen the challenges get worse in small targeted areas in the city, particularly in the neighborhoods and the sections of the South End and Roxbury and parts of Dorchester that we know. And so we are every summer taking one big step forward, and the challenge looks different a little bit every year because we are seeing progress on some fronts. We now have no encampments in the city of Boston, unlike many other cities, and because we have that infrastructure set up, but we have to do more, and we are doubling down with the police department, the Public Health Commission, to make sure that we are providing those direct pathways, increasing enforcement, increasing visibility of public safety officials, but also ramping up ways that we're partnering with the district attorney and other entities. I will say, I don't know, we can get to this separately in the conversation, but we have learned a lot that the same challenge, when approached in different ways, can have different outcomes. And so shoplifting, for example, is a place where we have seen a real result and real progress from a different approach. There are a lot of insights that you can pull over to how to think about addressing the challenges that spin off of mass and cast as well. But I don't know if we want to go into it now or later, but when we bring people together and think not just one incident at a time or one potential police interaction or one arrest at a time, but really understand individuals, have that information, be able to package and separate who are frequent flyers in the system, who are causing potentially more public safety challenge, whether it's through violence or other needs, who are individuals who really need more intervention, and then applying the appropriate intervention and supports in each instance. That's how we have a change in the dynamic from what we've seen.
Let's go to Martha. She's calling from Jamaica Plain. Welcome to the show. You're with the mayor.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Hi, Mayor.
Hello.
I'm calling very much as your supporter. I have a big sign in my front yard, but I do have concerns about White Stadium. I live about a half a block away, and I was, I'm hoping to understand better what you're thinking in terms of the cost for both sides of the stadium going forward. I realize it's complicated.
Yeah, thank
Well,
you,
thanks,
Martha.
Martha.
And I'm happy to follow up. I think I know which Martha this is. So I'm happy to follow up too with all the details. But I will just say at a high level, the city of Boston does a lot of ongoing construction and facilities renovation and building on a regular basis. So the process for White Stadium is the same as our team oversees for the new pool that we just cut the ribbon on, or a new fire station, community center, library, et cetera. How that process goes is, one, there's a usually very just early placeholder in the capital budget to get the list going of these are the projects we want to work on over the next 5 or so years. Then there's a process of actual design, which involves community giving feedback on what exactly they want to see there, the features, the amenities, the shape of the buildings. And with White Stadium, we went from just a placeholder cost for a certain amount of square footage that would include locker rooms, community room, strength and conditioning spaces, coaches' rooms, student study spaces, track and field, et cetera, to feedback from the community that said, we cannot have a boxy structure in the middle of historic Franklin Park, so it needs to be multiple, slimmer, shorter, smaller buildings to accommodate that. And so once that design was set, there was a budget estimate. Those what are called schematic designs then go into design development, which involves value engineering, getting to the level of detail where you have cross sections of the design, so not just what rooms are where and what spaces are where, but what does the wiring look like, what does the plumbing look like, to be able to get to actual construction. And then the final stage is the construction documents, which will be put out to bid through the public procurement process for example, laying the foundation and then building the grandstands, building the wings attached to that. All of that is runs according to the city's processes and state law. So what you should know is that you said both halves of the stadium. The half that will be constructed and paid for and house the professional soccer team's locker rooms and some of their spaces, the city will have no involvement in paying for anything related to those costs. We are paying for only the section of the stadium that is for student and public use only. And then if there are cost overruns with any part of the stadium, the city is not on the hook, again, to deal with anything that is related to the team. They will be renting the space from the city because the school district will continue to own the stadium. They will be paying for more than half of the construction. They will also be paying for the entirety of the operations and maintenance costs moving forward for whatever period of time they're in the lease with us. If at any point, worst case scenario, they decide they don't want to use the stadium anymore or they don't want to be in the project anymore, right? What happens? We have negotiated in the lease financial protections where if the team were to walk away, they could either finish the stadium by law, if they're part of the stadium, or pay the city $45 million for us to finish the stadium without them, and then we really would have it for full BPS use all the time. This is a deal that is codified in legal language and down to the very specific details of which hours games can start and have to end by, so that we're taking into account quality of life for the neighbors. We're now in the final stages also of finalizing the transportation, the TAPA transportation access plan agreement. I forget what the second A is, but that will be a legal document also that holds all parties involved to certain requirements for how the flow of transportation and large-scale events will be managed with the new complex.
I just have a couple of quick follow-up questions. Martha, thank you for your call. When you said a minute ago the city wouldn't be responsible for the overruns, what does that mean? If there are overruns, the team isn't going to pay more than its commitment, right? You pay it.
The commitment is that the team will build their portion of the stadium.
Right, but if there are overruns beyond estimates, it falls to the city to pay those costs.
No, well, it depends. I suppose theoretically it depends on which part of the stadium you're talking about. But if the team says, anyway, what I'm trying to say is there was no cap on the dollar amount that they are paying, and therefore the city would have to cover on top of that. The team is responsible for their part of the stadium, and they are going to build to that with the budget that they have, and the city is building our portion of the stadium.
And if they're so just to be clear, if there are overruns on, quote, as you say, our part of the station, those are the city's responsibility.
So for example, the cost of steel has gone up very significantly since the first budget estimate, and we're in the process of, again, trying to value engineer and get to the point where we would bid this out and have the final number.
Okay, so one last question. Last time you were here was right after your principal opponent, Josh Kraft, said he got a hold of a document that said that there was a cost estimate in the city of 171, whatever, roughly $170 million. I think your response to us was that was a worst case estimate. You said it is highly, highly unlikely we will hit this sort of $172 million number that's been floated out there. What is the number that you have most confidence in now in terms of what you believe the city's likely commitment is to be?
So I want to first emphasize that even in, maybe worst case scenario wasn't the right description for that. I want to be clear about what that document was, because it took us a while to even find it, because no one who was managing the project and involved in the ongoing meetings about it had heard where this number was and could not identify it. It took some real digging through all the documents on everyone's hard drives to even understand where it was pulled from. And it was pulled from a budget document that was never discussed with the group, but it was someone who did not have direct purview in the, talking to the construction vendors or any of the real day-to-day kind of management of the project. On the budget team, we're just sort of working through some numbers of, if we added 2x, 3x, to these kinds of costs, if we added a contingency of a gigantic amount, here's what it could theoretically get to in the city budget, just as a pure kind of planning exercise for themselves. It was not ever discussed with the group and not ever relied on as part of any planning discussion. And so it's not a real number. Someone accessed the system where you can see all the various documents related to the project in the hard drive, and pulled it and then shared that publicly. And then my fellow candidate put that out there as something that should be held up as truth, which is a very irresponsible thing to do in terms of trying to fearmonger among the public around what is real and what is not real.
So what is the real, this word doesn't exist, what is the realist number that you in City Hall and your office operate on? What's the likely ultimate total commitment of the city as of this moment, do you think?
The last budget estimate at the point where design was finalized was $91 million.
But you're above that now, aren't you?
We will likely be above because different line items have gone up. We will know when we get to the point of bidding out with construction documents what the ultimate
So you don't have
will be.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to go on, but the last thing. So you don't have a number when you're talking with your aides on this and key players. You don't say the most likely bottom line figure is 100 and X. You don't have that discussion?
There are lots of different scenarios that have been discussed. We are going to I mean, we're under construction right now. Construction is underway. The structure is demolished. We are in the middle of sourcing the materials and going out to bid. And this is how all city projects work, because we're not an entity that needs to rely on profits coming back and paying back investors. When we go through a project, ultimately, sometimes these are multi-year processes where when you start a school renovation, if certain of those inputs change, you update the budget as soon as you have the relevant information once it's been bid out to the public, bid publicly for construction vendors to give the actual market numbers, and then you update the budget from there. So we should know in a few weeks when the foundation packet is is bid out with the construction documents, how much that will be updated in the budget, and then we will see sort of how those adjustments go. But we build in contingencies, we build in these numbers, but this is a project that is within the scope of the capital budget that's been approved, and it is underway, and we are looking forward to the results that will be delivered, which is that our city kids deserve every opportunity that kids in the suburbs have, and it's been decades that they've had to play, practice, run, and grow in a crumbling facility, and I'm really determined and grateful for the chance that we get to overhaul it and finally give our students and our community the facilities that they need.
We've got Carson over at the Boston Public Library microphone with a question for the mayor. Hi, Carson. Thank you for the question to the mayor.
Okay. Hi, Mayor.
Hello.
I just wanted to ask, what are the economic implications of the federal government's attacks on Harvard to the city of Boston?
Yeah, thank you for the question. We are thinking of Harvard and all of our universities and so many of the research institutions, whether it's hospitals or in the biotech and life sciences industry. The pillars of our economy are under a lot of pressure right now. All of what we just discussed, plus tourism, plus many of the entities that really represent our shared history and the fullness and diversity of our communities. So I can't remember the exact figure. It's something like 18,000, 20,000. I'll see if maybe the team can flag for me the real number. But it's in the scale of multiple tens of thousands of jobs just from universities in the city of Boston. We're already seeing, right? BU was just yesterday, and we're seeing across the board, even if many of the changes that have been announced and the worst of the attacks have been stopped by the courts, the sheer unpredictability of it, not knowing if a grant is going to end up being rescinded or not, many employers and institutions are having to play it safe or make the most reasonable decision and not move forward if there's a question, to not go out on that limb. And that means that critical, in addition to the jobs, in addition to the economic impacts, critical advances in life-saving medicine and technology that will help reshape our lives are being halted, and that's setting us back decades at this point. And because we are a city that is a home to so much of that innovation and to this day, that revolutionary spirit of being the place where people come from all around the world to do good and to bring their ideas that can change the world and make them into reality. That is who we have been for hundreds of years at this point. And it's under a lot of pressure right now. So we're going to continue to work with the universities to try to hold strong and do everything we can to support them through this.
Carson, thank you for your question.
Okay, so here's a little sound from a New York City mayoral debate where candidates were asked to say whom they think is the most effective leader in the Democratic Party. And here's the guy who won the primary. That would be Zohran Mamdani's answer.
Mayor Wu of Boston.
So there you go. Spreading your fame from north to south, east to west. I mean, have you talked to this guy, and what's your analysis of why he did so well?
I have. I was able to chat with him very briefly on election night in New York and wished him well and congratulations. It takes a lot for New Yorkers to praise Boston, so we must be doing pretty well if we were able to get that kind of validation. And I chalk it up to the fact that our progress, our proof as a city is undeniable, and it's having an impact around the country. When we are the safest major city, we are the safest that Boston has ever been, dating back at least 70 years to when we first started tracking some of the public safety numbers thoroughly. And that's been at the same time that we've had the greatest ever expansion of universal pre-K and free childcare, the greatest ever investments in our public parks and open spaces, the most affordable housing created in the last 3 years and in any 3-year period for at least 25 years. And all of this is about making sure that families have a real foothold. We're trying to make Boston a home for everyone.
Well, as you know, I mean, housing is a huge issue here, and Josh Kraft, who wants to take your job, he's running for mayor against you. He's talked a lot about this. Massachusetts is in this Globe piece, got an F on home building. We're among the worst in the nation in terms of new home building. And Boston is building fewer homes, according to this survey in the Globe, than other cities, including Seattle and Washington, D.C. So I know housing is really important to you. Josh Kraft says it's your requirements for having too much of this new housing be set aside for affordable housing, and that's why we can't get anywhere. Developers say they can't make a profit. So why are we struggling so much with housing?
Well, first, I will just say, I mean, this argument that he's trying to advance in the mayoral campaign, that the way to make Boston more affordable is to roll back housing affordability requirements, it doesn't make any sense at all. And I certainly am not going to buy into the idea that the role of the public sector is to bail out developers and for-profit entities who, in tough economic times, want to be the first to make sure that they are still making a profit and made whole. We need private development. By all means, we need market rate housing, we need public housing, we need every kind of housing. And our administration has been determined to crush the numbers that have come before. And that's why we've been able to actually build and deliver more affordable housing under our administration than ever before in a comparable time window. We have helped more first-time home owners buy their homes in Boston than ever before. More than 800 families have been able to put down their roots in Boston through new programs that we've been developing, such as helping those who have a Section 8 voucher or live in public housing become homeowners directly. We have audited every square foot of city-owned land and identified parcels that are now in development for neighborhood-scale multifamily homes, all of which in our Welcome Home Boston program are being developed by MWBE developers who represent and reflect our communities. But the overall challenge right now is that interest rates remain at historically high levels, making it very difficult. People who REITs and institutional investors have a lot of other places to make their money back when interest rates are high. They put them in banks. They put them other places that are less risky than in real estate development. And so we will likely not ever be back at the point where we were a few years ago at near 0% interest rates that would make it very easy to jumpstart all the projects. But what we are doing is really targeting the places where we've permitted housing and it hasn't started construction yet. We've created an accelerator fund that will partner with the governor's Momentum Fund to help private developers who are very close to getting their projects across that financing finish line to just get over the last hurdle. We're also taking city-owned buildings, libraries like the West End Library, for example, that needed renovations and putting affordable housing on top, creating opportunities to streamline, redo our zoning code for the first time since 1965, and make sure that we are cutting red tape so that our conditions, the regulations, the rules are going to be clear, predictable, fast, and consistent. And as soon as the economic conditions reset across the entire country, we will be able to come roaring back. And in the meantime, we're focusing our public resources on affordable housing.
Marjorie started that by saying and I earlier had mentioned around White Stadium, some of the criticism of your principal opponent. Do you have a TV in your office?
I do.
When you see the ads, and I know it's not just on television, and they're pretty tough ads that have come from the PAC that supports the Kraft campaign, either in your office or home, what's your reaction to the tenor of those ads, Mayor Wu?
Yeah, I see them. It's not, there was a reason why in DC it was the temperature was less than the temperature of different bike lane meetings or other conversations in Boston, right? It's not for the faint of heart to be in a city where people have strong opinions, and I love the chance to go back and forth and really hear where the differences are and how we can find common ground and how we can move things forward. So it's not about disagreement, but the play here, which is to take a page out of the Trump national playbook of having millions of dollars flood in from mega donors to this current president, from out-of-state billionaires, from people who don't have a stake in this city, and to have that flood in as negative attack ads, right? Anonymous text messages, trucks that are driving around with billboards on the side of them. We've heard from small businesses that they are paying sometimes hundreds of dollars a month for the businesses to have the signs up in their windows. And they're all just tearing down our progress, tearing down our city, creating this impression, like many nationally are trying to do, that cities are places that are dangerous and scary because people are different from each other, and you know, we have to worry about crime and watch your back and be worried about this and that and the other. When you're on the ground in the city, when you have actually lived in the city for more than a mayoral campaign, when you have actually been involved and not just registered as a Democrat to put it up on your campaign signs, you know, a year before you launched your election, when you've been on the ground in every neighborhood, Boston is inspiring. Boston is beautiful. Boston is joyful and filled with possibility. Whether it's the kids jumping in the pool at the Condon or seniors at our events, we have challenges, and we are tackling them head on and doing so with unprecedented resources and political will and progress. But by and large, this city is moving in the right direction. Our residents are in the trenches with us, making a difference every single day. And it's disrespectful to the residents of the city to have a campaign run on millions of dollars of attacks, because the real point of these attacks is to turn you off from politics altogether, is to say, I'm so sick of the finger pointing and all of the just negativity that I don't want to have any part of that. When in fact, we have the opposite message. When things are tough, that's actually our call and our responsibility to jump in and get involved. And at the city level, you can make a difference every single day. There's something that you can do. You're not going to solve the whole problem, but you can make a real difference. You can show that people's involvement matters, and you can make sure that every single person in the city is seen, is heard, is valued, is celebrated for who they are and the kind of community that we are as a city.
You said by and large we're moving in the right direction. Where are we not moving in the right direction?
So I think everywhere we are moving, there's some places where I'm really impatient, and with Mass and Cass, for example, I wish we could move consistently in the right direction instead of feeling like it's one step forward, two steps back, three steps forward, and then just a really tough challenge. I think with the Boston Public Schools, we are making real progress, and I'm really proud and excited as a BPS mom, but there have been long-standing challenges with, when we came into office, it was 5 superintendents in 7 years before that had rotated through, and it's taken a while to build a solid foundation, and we're doing some amazing things, but I want every family to feel like this is their home in Boston Public Schools, and we're not quite there yet. And I think just in terms of the larger challenges, what was pointed out by Carson here around the key industries, the places where Boston's strength is actually the country's strength, we are having to use every bit of our energy just to hunker down and not get pushed backward when we should be running full steam ahead on tech and life sciences and new innovations that we know our talented workforce and our community has.
Let's go to Christopher in East Hampton. Thank you. East Hampton, thank you for calling, Christopher.
Hi, Christopher.
Hey, thank you for taking my call. Long time.
Good.
Thank you.
So, Mayor Wu, it's a pleasure to talk to you. I teach at a university in Western Mass. I'm doing research on over-tourism and gentrification in Boston, so this is an appropriate discussion. So, two things. How is the BPDA managing development in high tourism districts like Seaport, North End, or downtown? Also, I've tried to contact your office and the city tourism office for an interview with no luck about this. Can you assist?
Sure. I would be happy to
needs
take
a
your
word
number
in.
afterwards. Wait, can you tell me what is the definition of over tourism, just so I understand the concept?
Tourism that becomes completely unsustainable for the environment, including the businesses, the locals, the residents, to a point where the city cannot sustain it. So think what's going on in Florence, Venice, or Barcelona right now.
Yeah, the squirt guns. They're taking their squirt guns out and squirting tourists as they walk down the streets in Barcelona. Maybe we
They
should
sure
start
are.
doing that here.
Mayor,
Got it.
go ahead.
So, I think there's a lot of different threads that you're pulling in here. One is just foot traffic and the results of that. And in many places, especially if you use the term downtown, although in Boston, downtown can mean the financial district, Back Bay, or the Seaport, and it's different challenges in each place. But in many parts of downtown, for example, the financial district, people actually want to see more foot traffic and more visitors to help support the small businesses because of the changes with remote work having impacts on perceived safety or the vitality or just the kind of activation that's possible. So we're actually trying to drive up through events and programming and partnerships a lot of the ability for people to be downtown, stay downtown, commute downtown, live downtown. So we're trying to actually pump it up there. In some of the other neighborhoods, you mentioned the North End and Seaport. Seaport has its own climate challenges. We know that flooding is a real issue that already is happening, and we're one megastorm away from disastrous consequences. So really trying to manage for the short term of mitigation and emergency preparedness, as well as the long term of continuing to push ahead on climate leadership despite what's happening at the federal level. The North End is a place where, many people have heard about our conversation around outdoor dining from a particular point of view, but in fact, the residents of the North End, I think maybe similar to what you were saying, were very clear that they wanted to ensure that a residential neighborhood was still livable as well. And we haven't been able to come to a compromise or a more moderated position because of litigation and lawsuits, but there is some space there where we need not just the businesses and the economic operators who are so important for our community, but also the residents who are our community and tourists and visitors to all have the ability to coexist and to thrive together.
Thank you, Chris, for your call.
This isn't really, it's a pet peeve of mine, so why not? I have a chance to talk to the mayor. I'll ask you.
Why can't I drive in the bus lanes?
No,
Mayor?
not that,
It's
not
I'm
that,
sorry.
not that. We had this terrible tragedy out in Texas, this Mystic Camp, and I think we're up over 100 people now, many of them children, little girls that were trapped in that camp, and this is a high flood area, and we keep talking in the aftermath of this tragedy, well, who wasn't there, and why didn't the messages get through, and why wasn't there a siren system and all that? We don't talk in the media, and politicians don't talk about. This is what climate change is going to keep bringing. The reason it was so bad this time is because the heat and the moisture in the air, the drought and all that. But it's like you're swearing or something. We bury it in the press, and politicians bury it. And I'm wondering, is there some weird thing among politicians? They think they're going to annoy somebody, or why do we focus on the trees, and no pun intended, instead of the forest, which is the climate that's changing? We don't like to do that.
Yeah, there's numerous examples, right? Out in Los Angeles, floods locally in New England, and just last year with the flash flooding that happened in Massachusetts. There were parts of Massachusetts that had wildfire alerts on, unlike the standard of our climate. My guess is that in the immediate aftermath of a tragedy, the last thing that people who are grieving and worried about their loved ones and are experiencing that loss or still don't have information about whether it's a loss or not a loss, that they don't really want to hear what could be perceived as finger wagging about, well, if we had just done more on climate change, this and that, right? So there is something about dealing head on with the sheer scope of the tragedy and the horror that people are experiencing. But we do need to come back to that, and we do need to connect the dots that you can't say in hindsight that this would have changed everything or prevented everything, but more and more the signals and the alarm bells are that we have to be ready, and we have to be ready not only in the way of, we're changing our zoning code, and now we have net zero zoning with the city of Boston. All new big buildings will be net zero when they come online, starting from day one, starting this summer with all new developments.
What does that mean, net zero zoning?
We were the first city in the country to incorporate climate sustainability through net zero zoning code, which means that our laws and restrictions that define which buildings can be built themselves have climate embedded in it, so that you building above a certain 100,000 square feet or more has to be net zero, meaning they will be able to offset any uses of energy that are not completely energy efficient with either credits, or they will be themselves fully electric and green with this provision kicking in this summer. We need to do everything like that. We need to retrofit our homes and older buildings. We need to, plan ahead in every way. We're working in our public housing developments for geothermal energy to transition off of fossil fuels. But we also have to be ready that potentially tomorrow something horrible could happen in Boston with a major storm. And so we also have been preparing for those emergencies. We had our first ever deployables day where, you often, when you think flooding, the images of sandbags that are then put in and blocking the water, but sandbags take a really long time to fill up unless you're somehow storing them somewhere. But whereas if you go out there, you know where the flood paths are, you drill some of the holes in the ground now, and then you practice with large metal barriers that can block the water just as effectively. We have done now a couple of those test runs in front of major buildings and assets to keep the water out that way. It's much faster, much more effective. And we also have to get to the point where the communication loops are totally set as well, where residents, sometimes those of us of a certain age or older remember like drills of stop, drop, and roll, or like how to manage if there's a fire in your home, what do you do? We need to be at that point with flooding as well. Every child should know, what do you do? Where do you go? How do you stay safe? What actions do you take just as individual, private community members? This is why in our Boston Climate Action Plan, it's updated every 5 years. But this plan, we are not looking towards 2050 or long-range goals. We're looking for the next 5 years, what are the tangible steps that we will take to do the big things, change the policies, fight for a clean, green future, create those jobs, and also make sure that people are safe, are prepared, and have the ways where we could manage to the best of our ability an emergency should it happen.
Okay, so you have 1 minute. It's all we have left for a related question. My apologies to Adriana, who's here. We don't have time. I'm going to read your question. Is that okay? Because we only have a minute. Adriana wanted to ask, given Boston's forward-thinking climate change initiatives, what advice do you have, Mayor, for students who want to contribute? Or are there any local programs or partnerships we should be aware of? That's the deal, right? And I'm sorry, Adriana, my apologies.
Well,
what's your answer to her?
Come work for the city. I'm always recruiting. But we are blessed with an incredible ecosystem of organizations between Sierra Club, Boston Climate Action Network, Environmental League of Massachusetts, the Green New Deal Coalition, on and on and on. There are many, Mothers Out Front, there are many organizations that are plugged in and driving policy at the city and the state level here. So come, I'll get your information, we can plug you in, and we will put you to work right away.
Mayor Wu,
There you go.
it's good to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having
See
me.
you next
Nice to
month.
see everyone.
Thank you very, very
So
much for
Wu.
taking the time to be with us, Mayor Wu. We appreciate it, and our listeners appreciate it very much.